I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Adrianna Greenup, who is going to teach us about the complexities of happiness through her own experiences with grief. Welcome, Adrianna.
Happiness. I now believe it to be quite the enigma, as it is one of the most simple yet complex concepts I can think about. And it really is quite simple, because if I were to turn this speaker event into some interactive crowd work and ask any one of you to define happiness for me, you probably would be able to. But it begins to become more complex when we stop to ask ourselves, what does it really mean? Where can it be found, and how do we get there? If getting there is at all even possible. My name is Adrianna Greenup, and when I was thinking about the theme for this year's speeches, I immediately thought about my grief journey and the unexpected lessons I gained from it, ironically being about happiness. So, I come from a long line of Greenups from Baton Rouge and New Orleans, Louisiana on my father's side. And my father's name was Arthur Royal Greenup II, and he was born in Chicago on May 29th, 1955, after his father had moved from Louisiana. And then when my father was a young boy, he and his family moved to Pasadena, California, where my family now currently resides. And I had a very fulfilling childhood and upbringing. I was born in Los Angeles before moving to Costa Rica, where I played on the beach and created and maintained many lifelong friendships with those in my community or the kids I went to school with. And then I moved back to Southern California around 9 years old, where I continued to live until I graduated from high school to attend Tulane University here in New Orleans. And my parents worked in real estate. And so the nature of their work, alongside the fact that I did have slightly older parents, allowed for ample family time growing up. So much so that when one of my teachers in Costa Rica had asked me what my parents did for work, I said, nothing. Needless to say, as a kid, I had no idea what freelance meant, but I did draw enough concern for my parents to be called into the school the next day. Now, as funny or as cute as this story may be, it really does show how present my parents were. And on June 3rd, 2023, I suddenly lost my father. I had lost the greatest optimist I had in my life. I lost somebody who, whenever asked how his day was going, would say, "Oh, I'm having the best day ever. Thank God I woke up this morning." Nobody appreciated the present quite like he did. In exactly 6 weeks after I lost my dad, I was to embark on a 14-hour plane flight across the Pacific Ocean to a place where I knew nobody. Sydney, Australia, to study abroad. And when I had made my official decision to commit only 2 weeks before my departure, my mom had approached me with concern, rightfully so, as to how it could make such a large decision to leave for 5 months based off of all of the uncertainty I was now feeling. And I told her, well, I'm going to be uncertain about everything in my life right now. There's not going to be one choice I am going to make right now that I am going to be sure of. But I made this choice to apply for this opportunity about 5 months ago when my head was somewhat screwed on right, and so it is a decision I am going to stick with. But before I boarded that plane, I thought to myself, this is either going to be the best or worst decision I make for myself, and I have to be prepared for either. And it ended up being the former, because I learned all about the complexities of happiness. Happiness is community. I first arrived at my living accommodation around 8 in the morning, and by that same day, I was out exploring Sydney with some new friends that I had made. And among my father's many sayings, he used to tell me, life is for the living. And so I wanted to embrace that. I wanted to go out and make friends and create all of these lifelong memories that everybody who studied abroad before me had told me about. I believed that I deserved to have those experiences. And so I did what I could to survive, which was turning to my community as a source of happiness. And during my time there, I found that I actually laughed some of the hardest I ever had in my entire life during a time when I thought that I couldn't laugh at all. And I would look around to realize that it was with those who I would grow to love. And so I started to think, what is the connection between happiness and our community? But this thought is nothing new. I mean, studies have shown that those with a strong sense of community tend to be happier individuals. And the power of community can be seen all over the world, with some places even using it as a guiding philosophy. Let's take Ubuntu as an example. Ubuntu is a large, overarching philosophy used by Black people in Africa. It examines the intricate relationship between the individual and the community, stating, "I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am." Now, this large, overarching philosophy has guided various African communities for years and years, and so the power of community is not to be ignored. And during my time away, sometimes I would hear a song, or I would smell a certain smell that would remind me of my father, or I would see somebody wearing a similarly styled hat that he used to wear that would send me spiraling back down into the depths of my sorrow. And although I strictly and only liked to cry alone, there were those rare moments where I wouldn't. And I was met with grace and love. And I could squint and look up through my tears to see somebody or somebodies in front of me who loved me and cared about me. And that fact alone made me feel happy. I could be at the depths of my sorrow and still feel happy. That is the power of community, and the happiness that can be found within it is not to be underestimated. Happiness is balance. And happiness is balance similar to that of Newton's third law, which states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So if object A were to enact a force upon object B would enact an equal yet opposite force upon object A. And so in order to appreciate happiness for what it is, we must also accept it to be a balance similar to that of Newton's third law. Because I learned that happiness and sadness are two different sides of the same coin. We have to take the bad with the good. I could not have possibly felt as devastated about the loss of my father had I not first experienced all of the love, joy, and happiness that he brought me while he was here. And so the depth of my grief is really only as deep as my love for him, just as the depth of my sadness is only as deep as the happiness he once brought me while he was here. But grief can encompass many things, not just the passing of a loved one. It could be losing a job or job opportunity, missing an old friend, or going through a divorce or a breakup. And all of these things proves happiness's complexity, as we cannot feel happy without the inevitable balance of still somehow being able to feel sad. And so I started to wonder, well, then what do people mean when they say, I want to get happy? Someday I want to get happy. Can we even get happy? No, I don't believe so. I believe when people say that they are searching to someday get happy, they're striving for what is technically unattainable. For as long as happiness is this delicate balance, it will never be a constant state. Because happiness itself is an emotion. Instead, I believe when people say that they're searching to someday get happy, they're striving for what Greek philosophers call eudaimonia, or fulfillment. Now, this isn't to say that happiness can't be found within fulfillment, because, of course, we know that it can. But this word provides us with the space to acknowledge how we can feel happy yet unhappy. These feelings can coexist. And so instead, by changing our perspective and viewing happiness as the present emotion, it will allow us to embrace it more fully. So, happiness is perspective. Happiness is perspective, and take into account the perspective I took when I had to approach the thought of never physically seeing my father again. It surprisingly wasn't the night times that gave me my greatest hardship, although this did come with its own unique set of challenges and devastation. No, it was the mornings that did. And the mornings brought me my greatest hardship because I would have to face another day without seeing my dad again. And studies show that the most common age ranges where people lose their father between the ages of 40 and 53 years old, which means by the time I reach the age where most people begin to lose their father, I would have had to remember mine for longer than I knew him. And this thought is devastating, uninspiring, and seemingly impossible to go the next 20 years of my life without ever receiving a hug from him again. Oftentimes in the mornings I would lay frozen, unable to move as my brain was desperately trying to comprehend the gravity and magnitude of my loss. So in the mornings I changed my perspective. I would wake up and think, I just need to get through today. I'm not going to worry about the next 20 years. I'm not going to worry about the next 10 years, the next 5 years, the next 2 weeks, or even the next week. I just need to get through today. And so then when nighttime would inevitably approach, again, although devastatingly sad and lonely, I also slightly felt relieved because I made it through today. And then I would look up and it's been 2 days. And then I would look up and it's been 5 days, and then 2 weeks, 4 months, and now it's nearly been 11 months. And so by changing my perspective, it helped the seemingly impossible feel somewhat more possible. And this is how I view happiness. By changing our perspective and viewing it not as an end goal, but rather a coming and going feeling similar to that of anger, frustration, sadness, embarrassment, or excitement, it will allow us to embrace it more fully. So happiness is complex. It can be found through our community, observed as a balanced emotion, or appreciated differently with a change in perspective. So how did I make the most of my experience while I was away? Well, during harder days, I'd put on an outfit that I thought that I looked good in before I left my room. And then when I left my room, I would put on my AirPods and I'd play a really cheesy song, but it would be my favorite cheesy song. And I'd go out into the street and I would dance alone. Because those are the things that made me happy. And sometimes it had to be a choice. And those things made me happy even if it was for a moment. But all of those moments are what made up my experience and are what gave me the courage to go out and create more. So think about what makes you happy and do it. And whether it's during your most average day or during challenging, uninspiring, or seemingly impossible times, you can still look for happiness. One must just sometimes be willing to squint. Thank you.